Under the crystal chandeliers of a luxury hotel, I blended in with the wedding staff and heard my own son speaking behind a VIP door. Just put him in the nursing home. Once the court signs the guardianship papers, the ranch, the mineral rights, everything will belong to us. In that instant, I went completely numb, my hand gripping the wine tray so hard it cut into my palm and drew blood. Because I realized the son I had raised for 30 years had never been the victim. He was the one setting the trap all along. Thank you for being here. It means more than you know. Tell me in the comments, where in the world are you watching from city country? I want to hear from you here. A small disclaimer, this story carries fictional elements woven in for depth and purpose. Any familiar names or locations are coincidental. But what this story has to say, I believe, is worth your time. The drive from the ranch to Austin takes 3 hours on a good night. At 3 in the morning with nothing on Highway 290, but the occasional rig and the flat black sky above the hill country, it takes exactly 3 hours and 14 minutes. I know because I watched every minute of it on the dashboard clock. I had the heat running low. Not because it was cold January and Texas is cold enough, but the flannel under the borrowed uniform was doing its job. I ran the heat low because silence without some kind of background noise does things to a man's thinking that aren't always useful. The uniform was a medium. I'm a large. I'd picked it up 3 days before from a rental shop on Lamar black vest, white shirt, clip-on tie. The woman behind the counter didn't ask questions. People who rent serving uniforms at 64 years old don't usually invite questions. At some point, past dripping springs, I reached for my phone on the passenger seat and turned on the screen. The photo came up. I'd set it as the wallpaper 2 weeks ago and hadn't changed it back. July 2025, Lake Buchanan. My son had his arm around my shoulder, squinting into the sun, grinning the way he used to grin when he was 9 years old and caught his first bass. I was looking at the camera. He was looking somewhere past it. I remember thinking when I took that photo that it was the best afternoon we'd had in 2 years. I turned the screen off. You're going to show me I'm wrong, I thought. It wasn't a prayer exactly, more like the kind of thing you say when you need to say something to keep yourself moving forward. That's all I'm asking. Just show me I'm wrong. I pulled into the parking structure on 6th Street at 6:42. Not the valet entrance, not the main lot. The structure 3 blocks east where the catering vans park, and nobody looks twice at a man in a service vest carrying nothing. I sat in the truck for 4 minutes before I got out. Before I left the ranch that morning, I'd taken off my watch, the Seiko my wife gave me on our 20th anniversary, the one I haven't taken off in 11 years except to shower. I left it on the kitchen counter next to her photograph. I left my wedding ring in the same drawer I've kept it in for 8 years, since the week after the funeral, when I couldn't wear it anymore, but couldn't let it go either. I left my boots, the good ones, the ones I wear to church, and to meetings with bankers. I wore the old pair instead, scuffed at the toe heel, worn down on the right side. The kind of boots that belong in a kitchen, not a ballroom. I walked the 3 blocks to the Driscoll's service entrance with my hands in my pockets and my head down the way men who carry things for other men learn to walk when they want to be invisible. Nobody stopped me. Nobody looked up. Roy had found the name of a temporary worker who never showed up that morning. I used that name at the service entrance and in a hotel running short on wedding staff. Nobody asked more than they needed to. I pushed through the service door and into the light of the back hallway, fluorescent white, the smell of industrial cleaner, and something baking somewhere below. And I thought I've been in boardrooms in Houston, and offices in Midland, and courtrooms in Travis County. I've never felt more like myself than I do right now. I couldn't decide if that was a good thing. I had taken off everything that might tell someone who I was. There was only one thing I hadn't been able to remove: the photo on my phone, still on the screen, still waiting. I turned it face down in my vest pocket and walked toward the sound of voices. The back hallways of a 5-star hotel are nothing like the front. Up front, everything is marble and brass, and the kind of lighting that makes people look like better versions of themselves. Back here, it's linoleum and fluorescent tubes, and the sound of 100 small machines running at once, dishwashers, ventilation fans, the low hum of refrigeration units the size of a small barn. I'd been assigned to the main floor setup crew without anyone asking for ID. The catering supervisor, a tired-looking man in his 40s with a clipboard and a headset, pointed me toward a cart of silver trays and said, "Ballroom east side, don't stack the champagne flutes more than 3 high." That was the entirety of my orientation. She arrived at 7 o'clock exactly. I didn't know who she was at first, just a woman in ivory satin moving through the service corridor like she owned it, which for the next 12 hours she effectively did. The mother of the bride. 57 years old, hair set like concrete, a voice that carried without being raised. "These are ivory," she said, stopping at the floral arrangement near the entrance to the ballroom. She held up a single rose toward the light. "I ordered champagne. Ivory is not champagne. Champagne has warmth. This is a cold white." The florist, a young woman barely old enough to drink, started to explain the difference in dye lots between ivory and champagne in late-season roses. She got approximately 4 words out before the hand went up. "Fix it." I moved through the room with my cart, keeping my eyes on the trays. Over the next 20 minutes, I watched her dismantle the work of 6 people with the efficiency of a woman who has spent decades perfecting the art of finding fault. The centerpieces were wrong. The chair spacing was uneven. The lighting on the west wall was too warm. Then I heard a sound from the hallway, quiet, almost nothing. I turned. A young man, maybe 22, was standing against the wall near the kitchen entrance with a stack of linen napkins in his arms. The catering supervisor was in front of him, pointing at the table setup. "The fork goes here." The supervisor moved the salad fork 2 centimeters to the left. "Not there. Here. Do you understand the difference?" "Yes, sir." "Then why is every fork on this table in the wrong position?" The young man didn't answer. There wasn't an answer that would have helped. I watched him nod and begin resetting each place setting, working steadily, not rushing. His jaw was set in the particular way of someone who has learned that dignity sometimes means staying quiet and doing the work. A few minutes later, I passed the hallway near the service restrooms. Through the door, I could hear someone crying soft, trying not to be heard. One of the waitstaff. I didn't stop. There was nothing useful I could do. I pushed my cart to the far side of the ballroom and stood near the window that looked out onto 6th Street. Austin was waking up below coffee shops, opening early joggers, a city that had no idea what was happening 7 floors above it. The woman in ivory satin swept past me without a glance. Not through me, past me, the way you move past a piece of furniture you've stopped seeing because it's always been there. I thought about my son. I thought about him choosing this. Not being born into it, not trapped by it, choosing to stand at the front of a room with this family standing behind him and calling it a good life. Maybe he sees something you don't, I told myself. I picked up my cart and kept moving. The 2nd floor of the Driskill smells different from the back hallways downstairs. Up here, it's carpet and old wood and the kind of air that comes out of brass vents smelling like money. I was carrying a tray with 2 carafes of coffee, an errand the supervisor invented to keep bodies moving. Room 214 was 3 doors from the elevator. As I passed, I heard his voice. My feet stopped before my brain did. The door was open maybe 4 inches. Enough. He was standing in front of the full-length mirror dress shirt, open at the collar jacket on the back of the chair. Phone pressed between his ear and shoulder. One hand working on his cufflinks, the other holding a folded document. "The filing is already with the court," he said. "Travis County probate. Judge Harrison's docket mid-January." A pause. 2-step. First, we establish a pattern of cognitive decline. The doctor's preliminary assessment gives us the foundation. We need 2 supporting witnesses confirming incidents in daily functioning. confusion, disorientation, inability to manage financial decisions. I knew what cognitive decline meant in a legal context. It meant a judge looks at a man and decides he can no longer be trusted with his own life. It meant someone else signs the papers from that point forward. Then we petition for temporary guardianship first. Once the court gives us authority, we request placement at the facility in San Antonio. Another pause. It's a good place. Clean. He'll be comfortable. San Antonio, 3 hours from the ranch. He doesn't know anything. A small sound, not quite a laugh. The old man thinks the ranch is the whole picture. I've been managing him for 3 years. The cufflink clicked into place. I stood in that hallway and did not move. The coffee carafe was still warm against my palm. The pastries on the tray were still fresh. Everything in the world was exactly where it had been 60 seconds ago, except that it wasn't. He'll be comfortable. I turned those words over slowly, the way you turn a rock to see what lives underneath. Comfortable. As if comfort was the point. As if 3 hours from the land you spent 30 years building was just a detail, something to be managed, something the old man didn't need to weigh in on. I've been managing him for 3 years. He straightened his collar and reached for the jacket. I walked. Not fast, not slow, the pace of a man carrying coffee, which is a pace designed to be forgotten the moment you leave the room. At the end of the hallway, I stopped and set the tray on the linen cart near the elevator. My hands were still holding the shape of the carafe handles. I looked at them, 64 years of calluses, the scar on my left index finger from a drill bit. In 1987, the knuckle that never set right after a fence post in 2003. The old man thinks the ranch is the whole picture. I picked the tray back up and kept walking. There are things your hands keep doing even when your chest has gone completely hollow. I found the exit near the service stairwell on the east side of the building, a metal door with a push bar that opens onto a narrow alley between the Driskill and the parking structure next door. I stood there for a while. The alley smelled like dumpsters and January air, which is not a good combination, but it was outside and it was quiet, and nobody was going to hand me a tray. My phone showed 2 missed calls from the sheriff. I called back. He answered on the first ring, the way he always does, a habit from 30 years of wearing a badge that never fully leaves a man, even after the badge is gone. "Reports in your email," he said. "Sent it 20 minutes ago. You see it." "Not yet. Take a look when you get a chance." Mostly what we expected. Financial movement, the court filing the doctor's paperwork. A pause. "How are you holding up?" "Fine," I said. "I'll call you later." I opened the email, standing in that alley with the dumpster smell and the sounds of Congress Avenue filtering in from the street. The report was 11 pages. I had read the summary twice in the past week without going deeper. This time I read every page. The timeline was laid out: clean transactions, dates, contact records, legal filings. The sheriff had been thorough. 30 years as Travis County's top lawman doesn't leave your instincts either. I was on page 7 when I found it. 3 days. July 14th through 16th, 2025. The cells in the timeline grid were blank, not empty, the way other gaps were empty, but blank with a notation in the margin. Server error, data corrupted, unrecoverable. I read that notation 3 times. Then I put the phone down and looked at the alley wall. July 14th. My son had pulled into the ranch driveway at noon on a Tuesday with a 6-pack of Shiner and a bag of mesquite charcoal and said, "I took a few days off. Thought I'd come see you." We spent the afternoon on the back porch, grilled ribs that evening, watched the Rangers game on the old set in the living room. The next morning we drove out to the east pasture and walked the fence line the way we used to when he was in high school, checking posts, talking about nothing in particular. 3 days, the best 3 days in 2 years. Server error, data corrupted, unrecoverable. I did not call the sheriff back to ask about it. Not yet. There was a shape to the absence that I needed to think about before I said it out loud. Because saying things out loud makes them real in a way that thinking about them doesn't. I put the phone in my vest pocket and looked up at the slice of sky visible between the two buildings, blue and cold and completely indifferent. 40 years of reading geological surveys had taught me one reliable truth: when a layer of data goes missing in a formation, it doesn't mean nothing was there. It means something was there that someone didn't want you to find. I pushed back through the service door and returned to the hallway. There was still most of a day ahead of me. I intended to use it. The breakfast room on the first floor was already full by 8:45. I moved through it with a coffee carafe in each hand, one regular, one decaf, refilling cups that were still half full, because that's what you do when you're invisible and you need a reason to stay in the room. She was at the head of the long table near the window. Ivory satin hair set back straight. Around her sat 4 women I didn't recognize, relatives, friends, the kind of people who get invited to things because of who they know rather than who they are. They were laughing at something she'd said. She wasn't laughing. She was scanning the room. "The Whitmore account closes in March," she said to the woman on her left, dropping her voice just enough to signal importance without signaling privacy. "Once that goes through, the Hartley name will be in every major development, from downtown to the Domain. Every event. Every board." She picked up her cup without looking at it. My daughter knows how to position herself. She always has. I stepped forward and refilled her cup. She didn't look up. Not through me the way the father had looked through me earlier. This was different. He had chosen not to see me. She genuinely didn't register that I was there. I was a function, not a person. The coffee arrived. That was all. "The rehearsal dinner last night went well," one of the women offered. "It was adequate," she said. "The lighting in the private room was wrong. I've already spoken to the manager." She set her cup down precisely in the center of the saucer. Adequate is not what this family does. I moved to the next guest and refilled a cup that didn't need refilling. My daughter knows how to position herself. I thought about that. Positioning. Like a piece on a board moved deliberately toward a square that offers the most advantage. I wondered if her daughter knew she was being described that way. I wondered if it would have bothered her. Then I wondered if my son knew he was being used as a square on someone else's board, or if he thought he was the one moving the pieces. I was at the far end of the table when she spoke again, louder this time, meant to carry. "By this time next year," she said, "the Hartley name will mean something in this city that it hasn't meant before." She smiled at the women around her, the first real smile I'd seen from her all morning. That's what today is about. Not the flowers, not the lighting. Today is an investment. I set the carafe down on the service station and looked at the back of her head. An investment. Her daughter's wedding. My son's life. An investment. I picked up the carafe and walked back toward the kitchen. I thought about the way she hadn't looked up when I filled her cup. I thought about whether my son had ever sat across from this woman at a dinner table and seen what I was seeing now. And I thought if he had seen it and he was still here, what did that tell me about him? I had a reason to go back to the second floor, a stack of fresh towels that needed delivering to the rooms on the east corridor. I took the service stairs, not the elevator. Old habit. You learn more in stairwells than in elevators. Room 214's door was ajar again. I slowed without stopping. He was sitting on the edge of the bed. Dress shirt on, now jacket laid out flat beside him, tie not yet tied. His phone was in his hands, not pressed to his ear this time. He was just holding it, looking at the screen the way you look at something you've looked at 1,000 times and still haven't figured out what to do with. I recognized the photo on the screen from where I stood. His mother. The picture from her last good summer, 2016, the porch at the ranch, late afternoon light, her hair down. She was laughing at something off camera. She always laughed at things off camera. It was one of the things I never figured out how to photograph, the way she found things funny, that nobody else had noticed yet. He didn't know I was there. "I'm sorry, Mom," he said quietly. Not on the phone, just out loud to the screen, to the room, to whatever he believed was still listening. "I know you wouldn't want to see this." He paused. When he spoke again, his voice was lower, but he never understood. The money doesn't grow out of the ground by itself, no matter how much oil is under it. Someone has to work it. Someone has to move it. He never taught me that part. Another pause. He taught me how to read the land. He never taught me how to use it. I stood in the hallway and did not breathe. "I'm not doing this to hurt him," he said. "I need you to know that." He set the phone face down on the bed beside him. Then something happened that I wasn't prepared for. He put his face in his hands. Not crying, I don't think he was crying. Just still. The way a man goes still when he's been carrying something too heavy for too long, and there's nobody in the room to see him put it down for a moment. 10 seconds, maybe 15. Then he straightened, picked up his tie, stood in front of the mirror, and began to knot it with steady hands, his face settling back into something I didn't have a name for, not calm exactly, more like a decision that had already been made and didn't need to be revisited. I moved on down the corridor. He never taught me how to use it. I carried those words with me the rest of the morning. Because the worst part wasn't that he believed them. The worst part was that he might not have been entirely wrong. The balcony on the 3rd floor faces Congress Avenue. I went up there to collect a room service tray that had been left on the railing, a job nobody else had claimed. It was 9:30, and the street below was fully awake, the kind of Tuesday morning Austin does without trying all coffee cups and ride shares, and people moving fast toward things that feel important. I heard him before I saw him. He was standing in the corner of the balcony, below my 3rd floor East Wing phone to his ear, facing the street. Gray Brioni suit, silver hair, combed back the posture of a man who has spent 40 years in rooms where posture matters. His voice carried up cleanly in the cold morning air. "The amended prenuptial is ready for signature tonight," he said. "Co-management clause activates at the 2-year mark. Full joint authority over acquired assets." A pause. "He agreed to the terms last week. No pushback." I set the tray down slowly and stood at the railing. "And the father," another voice thin through the phone speaker. "The hill country situation." He made a small sound, not quite dismissive, more like a man cataloging something minor. "The boy is clear on what's real and what isn't. Dry land and an old truck don't transfer well in estate proceedings. We've had that conversation." The boy confirmed, directly. He checked his watch. "By year 3, the co-management clause gives us review authority over any major asset decisions. That includes outside investments, partnerships, anything above 50,000. Another pause. "It's a clean structure. And if the father gets involved," "He won't," he said. "Men like that don't get involved. They show up to weddings and go home to their land and let the world move without them." He turned, slightly looked out over the street. "My son-in-law understands which world he's chosen to live in." I stood on that balcony and listened to a man describe my son as an asset and my life as irrelevant in the same breath. Men like that don't get involved. I thought about the 3 hours I'd driven this morning. I thought about the vest I was wearing that didn't fit across the shoulders. I thought about the service entrance I'd walked through without anyone stopping me. Then I thought he's half right. Men like me don't get involved the way he means. We don't call lawyers at 9 in the morning, or structure co-management clauses, or talk about people's lives like line items in a contract. We do something else entirely. I picked up the room service tray and went back inside. Behind me, his voice continued smooth, certain already moving on to the next item on the list. The kitchen at 10:30 was running at full speed, every surface occupied, every person moving, the kind of controlled chaos that looks like disorder from outside but has its own logic if you've worked in it long enough. I'd been assigned to dishwashing for the past 20 minutes, which suited me fine. Nobody talks to the man at the sink. "Sir?" The voice was low, I didn't look up immediately. "Sir, I need 30 seconds." I turned. It was the young man from earlier, the one the supervisor had dressed down over the fork placement. Up close, he was younger than I'd thought. 22, maybe 23. Dark eyes, the kind of tired that comes from working double shifts and studying in between, not from staying out late. He glanced both ways down the kitchen corridor, then back at me. "I know you're not staff," he said quietly. I kept my face neutral. "Is that right?" Houston Chronicle, November 2019. He said it fast, like he'd been rehearsing the words. There was a piece on independent patent holders in the Gulf Basin. ExxonMobil acquisition, $73 million. They ran a photo. You were standing in front of well number 7. Blue flannel shirt, checkered. You were the only person in the photo not wearing a hard hat. I looked at him for a long moment. He didn't look away. "I've been carrying that photo in my head for 6 years, he said. "My father showed it to me. He said, 'That's a man who built something real.' He showed me because..." He stopped, swallowed, started again. "He showed me because he was trying to do the same thing. Build something real." "What's your name?" I asked. "Caleb," he said. "Caleb Reyes." "What are you studying, Caleb?" "Petroleum geology, UT Austin, final year." He held my gaze. "I'm not here for the money, the catering job, I mean. I'm here because of your son, because of what he did to my father's company." A breath. "And because my father asked me before he died to find a way to make it right." The kitchen noise continued around us, clanging trays, shouted orders, the hiss of the industrial sprayer 2 stations over. In the middle of all of it, this young man stood completely still, waiting. "Your father," I said carefully. "When did he pass?" "November 2024. I didn't ask how." The way he said it told me enough. "Stay close," I said. "Don't do anything. Don't say anything to anyone until I tell you." I picked up a clean tray from the rack. "Can you do that?" "Yes, sir," he said. "I've been doing it for 6 months." The suite on the 4th floor had been reserved for the bride since 7 that morning. I was sent up with a tray of champagne flutes, 1 bottle of Veuve Clicquot, 4 glasses, a small card from the hotel that said "Congratulations" in gold script. Standard procedure for wedding suites. Nobody thinks twice about the man carrying champagne. The door opened before I knocked. A bridesmaid, young blonde expression, carefully blank, held it open and stepped aside without looking at me. I carried the tray in. She was at the vanity. 2 makeup artists working on either side of her, the kind of professionals who move like surgeons, precise, economical, no wasted motion. The dress hung on the back of the closet door, cathedral length, buttons up the spine. The room smelled like hairspray and freesia. Her mother stood behind her, watching in the mirror. "Again," she said. Her daughter looked at her own reflection and let a smile move across her face, warm, slightly. Surprised eyes, soft. The expression of a woman who has just been told something that delights her. "Too eager," her mother said. "Drop the eyes half a second before the smile. Let the smile catch up." She tried again, eyes first, then smile. "Better." Her mother tilted her head. "Hold it 2 beats, then let it fade naturally. Don't kill it. Let it go." I set the champagne tray on the side table. "Leave it," the bridesmaid said, still not looking at me. I was turning to go when the mother spoke again, not to me, not to the makeup artists. To her daughter in the mirror, in the tone of a woman passing on information she considers essential. "The amended agreement needs your signature before you go up to the room tonight," she said. "Don't let the evening get away from you. First night, or not business before sentiment." Her daughter's eyes met her mother's in the mirror. Something passed between them that I couldn't read, not quite agreement, not quite resistance. More like the look of a woman who has been having a version of this conversation her entire life, and has learned that engaging with it costs more than it returns. "I know, Mother," she said. "Good." Her mother smoothed the back of her daughter's hair, a gesture that managed to be both tender and proprietary. "You look beautiful." Now hold the smile again from the top. I walked out and closed the door behind me. In the hallway, I stood still for a moment. She had been practicing the smile she planned to give my son on their wedding day. And somewhere in the same building, my son had been sitting on the edge of a bed talking to a photograph of his dead mother, saying, "I'm not doing this to hurt him." Two people. Same ceremony. Each of them performing a version of something they'd decided in advance. I wondered which one of them was more alone. I was coming back down the VIP corridor on the second-floor tray in hand, heading for the service station, when I heard the footsteps behind me. Deliberate. Unhurried. The walk of a man who has never needed to move quickly, because the world has always waited for him. "Excuse me." I turned. He was standing 6 feet away, silver hair, the gray Brioni suit I'd seen from the balcony above. Up close, he was taller than I expected, with the kind of face that photographs well and reveals very little. He was looking at me the way you look at a piece of furniture that has been moved to the wrong room. "The Magnolia room needs ice," he said. "There should be a bucket on the bar cart, but there isn't. See to it." "Yes, sir," I said. He didn't move. He was still looking at me, not at my face, at the whole picture. The vest that didn't fit at the shoulders. The boots. The way my hands held the tray. "And going forward," he said, his voice dropping just slightly, taking on the careful tone of a man who chooses his words not for kindness, but for precision. "During the reception this afternoon, I'd ask that the service staff remain near the kitchen corridor. Our guests aren't accustomed to," he paused, "selected. A certain kind of presence near the main entrance." I looked at him. "A certain kind of presence," I said. "You understand what I mean," he said. It wasn't a question. It was the assumption of a man who has never had to explain himself to someone in a service vest. "I do," I said. He held my gaze for one more second, confirming something he'd already decided, then turned and continued down the corridor. He didn't look back. I stood there with my tray, a certain kind of presence. I had stood on my land at 4 in the morning and watched the stars move across the hill country sky. I had sat across from ExxonMobil's chief legal team for 3 days in a Houston conference room and not blinked. I had buried my wife on a Tuesday in October and gone back to work on Thursday because the wells don't stop for grief. And this man in his Brioni suit on a Tuesday morning in January had just told me to stay near the kitchen because I was a certain kind of presence. I thought about the flannel shirt I was wearing underneath the borrowed vest. The one I'd put on this morning without thinking about it, the same shirt I wore every day on the ranch. The same shirt I'd been wearing the day the ExxonMobil photo was taken. Men like that don't get involved. He was going to find out exactly what men like that do. I picked up the tray and walked toward the Magnolia room to get the ice. The Magnolia room was at the end of the second-floor corridor. A small meeting room, dark wood paneling, a round table that seated 8A chandelier that someone had dimmed to the point of being decorative rather than functional. The door was pulled almost shut when I arrived with the ice bucket. I pushed it open quietly. 2 people inside. My son standing near the window. And a woman I recognized from 30 feet away, though I hadn't seen her in 2 years, Margaret Holloway, 62 years old, estate attorney, the woman who had stood at my wife's graveside in October 2017 and wept without trying to hide it. My wife's closest friend for 22 years. The woman who helped draft our joint trust in 2009, who knew every number, every asset, every clause. I moved to the mini refrigerator in the corner and began loading ice into the bucket. Slowly. The trust can be challenged on the grounds of diminished capacity, Margaret was saying, her voice measured professional, the voice she used in depositions. If we can demonstrate a sustained pattern of cognitive impairment, the original trust structure becomes contestable. The court would appoint a neutral administrator pending resolution. "How long does that take?" my son asked. 18 months typically. But we can file for emergency interim guardianship much faster, 6 to 8 weeks if Harrison moves it. With the physician's preliminary assessment already on record, we have standing to request an immediate review. and the trust assets are frozen during that period. The administrator controls all disbursements. Nothing moves without court approval. I set the last cube of ice in the bucket without making a sound. What about the mineral rights? My son asked. Included in the trust estate, Margaret said. All of it. The land, the patents, the ExxonMobil royalty structure. Everything your father built can be placed under court supervision once the emergency petition is accepted and the judge appoints an interim guardian. I heard him exhale, not relief exactly, more like a man checking something off a list. Then he looked toward the corner of the room. I was already moving toward the door tray in hand, the way a man moves when he has always been invisible and knows exactly how to stay that way. The door closed behind me. I stood in the hallway. Margaret Holloway. 22 years. She had held my wife's hand in the hospice. She had read a poem at the funeral, something about rivers and returning. She had called me on the first anniversary of my wife's death just to check in, and I had appreciated it more than I told her. She was sitting in that room right now, using everything she knew about my wife's estate to dismantle it. I walked to the end of the corridor and stood at the window. Outside Congress Avenue moved the way it always does, indifferent, continuous, completely unaware. I had been in this building for 4 hours. I had heard enough to know that what I came here hoping to disprove was not only true, it was larger than I had imagined. I reached into my vest pocket and took out my phone. The alley behind the Driscoll smelled like warm asphalt and someone else's lunch. I pushed through the service door and stood in the narrow strip of shade between the building and the parking structure, and I called the sheriff. He picked up on the second ring. "Talk to me," he said. "It's worse than we thought," I said. "Margaret Holloway is here. She's in a room with my son right now. She drafted the petition herself." A pause. "Margaret." His voice was careful. "You're certain?" I was 4 feet away from her. Another pause longer. I could hear him breathing the particular silence of a man who is recalibrating. "How bad? They're going after the full trust. Mineral rights included. Emergency guardianship filing 6 to 8 weeks if the judge moves fast. They already have the physician's paperwork on record. That's the Whitmore doctor, the golf buddy. Has to be," I said. "There's no one else who could have signed a preliminary assessment without me knowing." "All right." I heard him shift the sound of a man standing up from a chair. "What do you need?" I looked up at the Driscoll. 4th floor, the suite windows. 2nd floor, the Magnolia Room. Somewhere in between 200 guests arriving in 3 hours for a wedding that was also the closing ceremony of a plan 18 months in the making. "Activate Plan B," I said. When I send you the letter R. Not before. Not after." I paused. "And don't ask me anything else right now. I need to think." "Understood." A beat. "You doing okay in there?" I thought about Margaret Holloway reading a poem about rivers at my wife's funeral. I thought about my son sitting on the edge of a hotel bed talking to a photograph. I thought about Caleb Reyes standing in a kitchen corridor saying my father asked me to find a way to make it right. "I'm fine," I said. I ended the call and stood in the alley for another minute. Plan B had been sitting in a folder on my desk at the ranch since October, 3 months of quiet preparation, built for the possibility I had spent 3 months hoping I wouldn't need. The letter R. 1 character. The kind of signal that means everything has been confirmed and there is nothing left to wait for. I hadn't wanted to send it. I still didn't want to send it. But wanting and needing are different things, and I had spent 40 years in an industry that teaches you the difference very quickly. I pushed back through the service door and returned to the hallway. There was a wedding to attend. I was refilling water glasses on the east side of the dining room when he walked in. He came through the main entrance with his new wife on his arm, and the room shifted the way rooms shift when the person everyone has been waiting for finally arrives. Conversations paused. Heads turned. The senator near the window smiled first. "Congratulations, son." The senator extended his hand. "Your father-in-law tells me you've been doing some interesting work in private wealth management." "Trying to," my son said, shaking it. Austin's been good to us. Good to you, Modest? The senator laughed. I've heard the numbers. Not modest at all, my son smiled. You know how it is, right place, right time. Right people, the senator said, and they both laughed at that. The comfortable laugh of men who understand that right people is the only variable that actually matters. I moved to the next table. His new wife touched his arm lightly. The Connors are near the back, she murmured. I see them. He was already scanning. Give me 2 minutes with Harrison first. Don't spend too long. Mrs. Connor gets territorial about being acknowledged early. I know, he said. I've been managing her since March. She squeezed his arm, and they separated smoothly, him toward the judge, her toward the Connors, like two people who had rehearsed this exact division of labor until it felt natural, because that's exactly what it was. I set down my water pitcher and picked up a fresh one from the service station. He was crossing toward me now, not toward me, toward the table 3 feet to my left where Judge Harrison was sitting. I kept my eyes down and moved to refill the glass at the near end. Harrison. My son extended his hand. Thank you for coming. Wouldn't miss it, the judge said, standing. Your father-in-law speaks very highly of you. He's generous, my son said. We're hoping to have dinner soon, the 4 of us. There are some developments I'd love your perspective on. Of course, the judge said. Call my clerk Monday. I will. He was 8 feet away from me. I poured water into a glass that was already full and watched the overflow stop just before the rim. He turned from the judge, and for 1/2 second, his eyes moved across my section of the room. The service station, the water pitcher in my hand, the vest that didn't fit at the shoulders. Nothing, not through me, not past me. I was a function in the room, and the function had been noted and filed and dismissed in the same 1/2 second. I set the pitcher down. 33 years ago, I drove 90 miles an hour to a hospital in San Marcos because my wife called and said it's time. I held him 20 minutes after he arrived. He weighed 8 pounds 2 ounces, and he gripped my index finger like he intended to pull me somewhere. Excuse me. A woman behind me needed her glass refilled. Of course, I said. I picked up the pitcher and went back to work. Caleb found me at 1:40 in the afternoon, in the narrow corridor behind the main kitchen, where the supply shelves ran floor to ceiling, and the overhead light flickered once every few minutes, like it was thinking about going out. He didn't say anything at first, just held out an envelope, brown letter-sized, old enough that the corners had softened. My name on the front in handwriting I didn't recognize, block letters, careful the handwriting of a man who wanted to be sure it was legible. My father wrote it 3 weeks before he died, Caleb said. He made me promise to give it to you in person, not mail it, not email, in person. I took it, inside a single folded document, 8 pages stapled in the upper left corner. A loan agreement dated March 14th, 2023. The borrower's name was my son. The lender was Reyes Petroleum Services, LLC, Caleb's father's company. The amount was $340,000 drawn against the company's operating line. The repayment terms were 12 months. The collateral listed was personal guarantee of borrower. I read the whole thing, then I read it again. He never paid $1, Caleb said. His voice was steady, the steadiness of someone who has had a long time to make peace with a fact, while still not being at peace with it. Not one payment. My father called 14 times between April and September of 2023. I found the call logs. Your son answered twice. What did he say? The first time he said the transfer was processing, and there had been a bank delay. The second time he said he was restructuring his accounts and would have everything settled by the end of the quarter. Caleb paused. There was no third conversation. My father stopped calling in October because the company's line of credit was called in by the bank in September. Without the repayment from your son, he couldn't service the debt. The company went under, I said. Filed Chapter 7 in February 2024. He looked at the floor for a moment, then back up. My father built that company for 19 years. He started it with one truck and a contract for 2 wells in Midland. By 2022, it was 12 employees and a solid book of business. He stopped. He knew your name. He trusted your son because of your name. I held the envelope in both hands. My father left a note with the envelope, Caleb said. It said a man who builds something real knows what it costs when someone takes it. He said he believed you'd know what to do. I looked at this young man, 22 years old, his father's eyes, his father's careful handwriting, on the outside of an envelope he'd been carrying for 6 months. He was right, I said. I know what to do. I found Dr. Raymond Garrett at 2:10 in the afternoon, standing near the bar in the pre-reception area with a glass of scotch and the expression of a man who is enjoying a party less than he expected to. He saw me before I reached him. I watched the color leave his face in real time, not gradually, all at once, the way it happens when the thing you've been half expecting for weeks finally walks toward you in a service vest. Raymond, I said quietly, stopping beside him. James. His voice dropped to almost nothing. What are you doing here? Same thing you are, I said, watching. He looked around the room, instinctive, the check of a man who doesn't want to be seen in a particular conversation. Then he looked back at me and I could see it, the guilt that had been sitting behind his eyes since the moment he recognized me waiting for exactly this. The preliminary assessment, I said. The one you signed in September. Tell me what it said. He took a long breath. It was an informal evaluation. 3 questions about short-term memory, 2 about executive functioning. It wasn't a clinical diagnosis, it was a preliminary screen. I signed it as a starting point for a fuller evaluation. Did you know what it was going to be used for? He was quiet for a moment. Your son told me he was concerned about you. He said you'd been making some unusual decisions about the ranch, giving away equipment, forgetting appointments. A pause. He seemed genuinely worried. I thought I was doing the right thing. And now, he set his scotch glass down on the bar. I called my attorney this morning, before I drove here. He straightened slightly, the posture of a man making a decision he should have made sooner. I've already drafted a retraction. It goes to the court Monday morning, formal withdrawal of the preliminary assessment on the grounds that it was obtained under misrepresentation of purpose. Does Margaret Holloway know? Something shifted in his expression. Margaret is involved. She's in the Magnolia Room, I said. She drafted the petition. He closed his eyes for exactly 2 seconds. When he opened them, something had hardened. She knows what a retracted physician assessment does to an emergency guardianship petition. Without it, they have no medical standing. He picked up his glass again. Monday morning. My attorney has the draft. It goes out first thing. Before noon, I said. Before 9, he said. I nodded and moved away from the bar. Behind me, I heard him set the glass down again, harder this time. The sound of a man who has just decided something he should have decided 3 months ago and is not happy about how long it took him. I didn't blame him. Some decisions take time to arrive at. The important thing is arriving. The officiant was a man in his 60s, silver hair, reading glasses, the unhurried voice of someone who has done this enough times to know that pace is everything. Do you take this woman, he said, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do you part? My son looked at her. I do. His voice was warm. Certain. The voice of a man who means what he's saying, or has decided so completely to mean it, that the difference no longer matters. I stood behind the 3rd column and held an empty champagne tray against my chest. The officiant turned. And do you take this man to have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do you part? She looked up at him. I do. A pause. Then the officiant smiled, the practiced smile of a man who delivers good news for a living. Before we proceed to the rings, I've been asked to share a few words that the groom has prepared. My son reached into his jacket pocket and unfolded a single sheet of paper. He looked at it for a moment, then folded it back up and put it away. "I don't need it," he said quietly. A small sound moved through the room, 200 people exhaling at once. He looked at his bride. "I spent 3 weeks writing something that sounded right," he said. "And then this morning I sat in that room upstairs, and I realized that the things worth saying don't sound right. They just sound true." He paused. "So, the true thing is, I have been waiting for someone who makes the world make sense. And you do, that's all I've got." She laughed, genuine surprise, and squeezed his hands. The officiant cleared his throat gently. "The rings, please." I watched my son slide the ring onto her finger. His hands were steady. His face was open in a way I hadn't seen since before his mother got sick, since before everything in him narrowed and hardened into what he became after we lost her. I have been waiting for someone who makes the world make sense. 8 years ago, in a hospital hallway in October, I had walked past a half-open door and seen my son sitting on the floor with his back against the wall, his face in his hands. 25 years old. He hadn't heard me coming. I had stopped. Stood there for a long moment. And then I had walked on because I thought he needed the privacy. Because I didn't know what to say. Because I was 64 years old, and I still hadn't learned how to walk into a room where someone I loved was falling apart, and just sit down next to them without needing to fix anything. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the officiant said. "You may kiss the bride." The room erupted. I held the empty tray against my chest and looked at my son, happy genuinely. Happy the way that breaks something open in you when you know what it cost and what it's built on, and that you are at least partly responsible for both. I had walked past that door 8 years ago. I was still walking past it. The officiant was reading a passage about commitment and partnership, something from Corinthians, the version people choose when they want the words to sound ancient and certain, when my phone vibrated in my vest pocket. I didn't take it out immediately. I waited until the string quartet came back in softly, under the reading, giving me enough ambient sound that the small motion wouldn't carry. A text from the sheriff. 4 lines. Offshore account. Cayman Islands. First Cayman bank account opened March 2024. Current balance $1,240,000. I kept reading. 23 transfers. March 2024 through November 2025. Source accounts Ranch Operating Fund and Reyes Petroleum Services, LLC. Final transfer dated 2 weeks before the company's Chapter 7 filing. My son was at the front of the room holding his new wife's hands, listening to words about commitment. Joint account holders, your son and Margaret Holloway. I read that last line twice. The officiant continued. The string quartet played softly. 200 people sat in respectful silence watching 2 young people stand at the front of a room and make promises to each other. I stood behind the 3rd column and read the words joint account holders and felt something settle in me, not shock, not rage, something colder and more final than either of those. The feeling of a door closing on a room you had hoped to return to and understanding for the first time that you won't. I had driven 3 hours this morning hoping to be wrong. I was not wrong. I had stood in a hallway holding a coffee carafe, hoping that what I heard through a 4-inch gap in a door was somehow less than it sounded. It was more. I had watched my son stand at an altar and look genuinely happy, and I had held on to that, let myself hold on to it for a few minutes, because a man needs something to hold on to when everything else is in freefall. And now I was standing behind a marble column with $1,240,000 on a screen in my hand, and my son was saying I do 12 feet away, and Margaret Holloway was somewhere in this building, and the last transfer had been made 2 weeks before Caleb Reyes's father's company collapsed. The officiant asked if anyone had reason to object. The room was silent. I put the phone back in my vest pocket and looked at my son. "I do," he said. His voice was warm and certain and completely his. I waited for the ceremony to end. The cocktail hour began at 3:15. The ballroom doors opened, the string quartet moved into something lighter, and 200 people redistributed themselves across the room with the efficiency of people who have attended enough events to know exactly how to fill a space. I was moving through the east corridor toward the service station when I heard footsteps behind me. One set, unhurried. I didn't turn around. The left shoulder, my son said quietly. It's been pulling all day. I stopped. He was 3 feet behind me, champagne glass in hand, looking not at me, but at a point slightly past my left shoulder, the way you look at something when you want to reference it without making it a confrontation. The rental place on Lamar, he said. They only stock mediums and larges. You've always been between the two. He took a sip of his champagne. You should have gone to the one on South Congress. Better inventory. I turned to face him. He looked at me then directly for the first time all day. His expression was unreadable in the way that only very controlled people can manage, not blank, not cold, just carefully neutral. The face of a man who has decided in advance how much to show. How long, I asked. Since you walked through the service entrance, he said. 6:43 this morning. 6:43. I had been inside this building for 9 hours, believing I was invisible. The cufflink conversation. The magnolia room. The balcony. Every door that happened to be open at the right moment. Was any of it real, I asked. The things I heard. He held my gaze. All of it. Then why let me hear it? He was quiet for a moment, not hesitating, thinking the way he had always thought, methodically and without rushing. Because I wanted you to understand, he said finally. Not find out later from a lawyer. Understand. From the beginning. That's not understanding, I said. That's theater. Something moved behind his eyes, not guilt exactly, more like the recognition of an accurate description. Maybe, he said. But you came here in a service vest, Dad, so we're both performing something. He straightened his jacket. Enjoy the reception, he said, and walked back toward the ballroom. I stood in the corridor and watched him go, the set of his shoulders, the particular way he moved through a room, the thing he got from his mother, and the thing he got from me, walking away together in a charcoal suit. I had 9 hours of information in my vest pockets. I went to find the others. The storage room behind the kitchen was the size of a large closet, metal shelving. On 3 walls, a folding table, in the center, one overhead bulb on a pull chain. I had found it at 8 that morning when I needed somewhere to read the sheriff's report without being seen. It smelled like industrial cleaning solution and old cardboard. It was the most useful room in the building. The sheriff was already there when I arrived, sitting on an overturned milk crate with his jacket off, his phone on the table, a legal pad with handwritten notes in front of him. He'd come in through the service entrance 40 minutes ago. He knew, I said, closing the door behind me. The sheriff looked up. How long since I walked in this morning? He was quiet for a moment, processing that the way he processed everything methodically, without visible reaction. So the doors. Possibly staged, I said. Possibly not. He said all of it was real. You believe him. I believe the Cayman account is real, I said. I believe the petition is real. I believe the loan agreement Caleb's father left behind is real. I pulled out the folded document I'd been carrying since 1:40 and set it on the table. The rest I'll sort out later. The sheriff picked it up, scanned it. His jaw tightened at the amount. 340. He never paid $1. And the father. November, I said. Same month Reyes Petroleum filed Chapter 7. The sheriff set the document down carefully, the way you set down something that deserves to be handled with care even when everything around it is falling apart. He picked up his phone. The accountant. You want me to make the call? I already texted him, I said. He's driving up from Fredericksburg. 3-hour drive. He left an hour ago. I looked at my watch. He'll be here by 6. The sheriff studied me. You've been running parallel tracks all day. I've been running parallel tracks for 3 months, I said. Today is just the day they converge. He nodded slowly. The Lone Star people. When do you want them here? 6:30, I said. Congress Avenue entrance, 3 vehicles. Tell them to park in sequence and wait for my call. That's the same time as the reception dinner. Yes, I said. He looked at me for a moment. 30 years of friendship in that look. All the things we'd been through that I didn't need to list because he already knew them. All right, he said. He picked up his phone. I'll make the calls. I pulled up a second milk crate and sat down across from him. Outside the door, the hotel continued music laughter, 200 people celebrating something that was about to change completely. She walked into the grand ballroom at 3:55 in the afternoon. I was near the service door on the west wall when I saw her come in, no escort, no invitation visible, no acknowledgement of the room's expectation that people who arrive at receptions arrive with someone. She was 44 years old, dark hair, a gray dress that cost more than most people's monthly payments, and the kind of stillness that doesn't come from calm but from decision. She had decided before she walked through that door exactly what she was going to do, and everything else, the room, the people, the occasion, was simply scenery. I watched my son see her. He was mid-sentence with the state senator when his eyes moved to the entrance. A reflex, the way eyes move at the edge of any room when something unexpected enters. For 3 seconds, his face did something it hadn't done all day. It lost control of itself. The color dropped. The smile suspended in mid-position, neither completed nor abandoned. Then he brought it back, smooth, practiced the recovery of a man who has trained himself not to show the things he feels. 3 seconds. If you hadn't been watching for it, you would have missed it. I crossed the room. She saw me coming and waited, her champagne glass held at a slight angle, her expression giving away nothing. You're not here for him, I said quietly, stopping beside her. No, she said. I'm here for you too. Her name was Diana Whitfield, 44 years old, owned 12 restaurants across Texas and Oklahoma, built from one location in Fort Worth over 16 years. Net worth roughly $18 million. She had met my son at an Austin Chamber event in February 2024, and he had spent the next 14 months telling her that the ranch was a joint asset, his and mine together, legacy, wealth, oil, money, going back decades, and that investing alongside him was as close to guaranteed as anything in Texas got. He showed me technical documents, she said, her voice even. Geological surveys, extraction projections, production records going back 15 years. The numbers were extremely specific. How specific, I asked. 6 decimal places on the GPS coordinates, she said. Barrel per day projections that matched your actual production within 2%. She looked at me steadily. Someone who knew the real numbers gave him the real numbers. I thought about the sheriff. I thought about July 14th through 16th. I thought about 3 days of BBQ and fence walking, and the best afternoon in 2 years. How much? I asked. $2 million, she said. Plus 3 properties transferred through what turned out to be fraudulent assignment agreements. She paused. I'm not here to cause a scene. I'm here because my attorney needs your confirmation on record that those technical documents were fabricated, that the ranch was never a joint asset. I looked at her. They were fabricated, I said. Every number in them came from somewhere it shouldn't have. She nodded once. That's what I needed. The storage room fit 4 people if nobody moved their elbows. The sheriff took the wall on the left. Diana Whitfield stood near the door with her arms crossed. Her gray dress completely wrong for the room, and completely right for the person wearing it. Caleb sat on an overturned milk crate with the loan agreement in his lap. I stood at the center table with everything spread out in front of me. Walk me through it, Diana said. All of it, from the beginning. Cayman Islands account, I said. First Cayman Bank, $1.24 million. 23 transfers between March 2024 and November 2025. I pointed to the sheriff's printout. Source accounts: my ranch operating fund and Reyes Petroleum Services. Diana looked at Caleb. That's your father's company. Was, Caleb said quietly. The last transfer from Reyes Petroleum came 2 weeks before the Chapter 7 filing. She was silent for a moment. He drained a dying company's account into an offshore fund. Appears that way, the sheriff said. Joint account holder, I continued. My son and Margaret Holloway, estate attorney, drafted the guardianship petition herself. Diana looked at me. She was supposed to be protecting your estate. She was my wife's closest friend, I said. 22 years. Nobody said anything to that. There wasn't anything useful to say. I put the loan agreement on the table next to the Cayman printout. Then Caleb placed his copy of the bankruptcy filing beside it. Then I added the copy of the court petition TX-2025-CV-4471, Judge Harrison's docket, January 15th. 4 sources, I said, independent of each other, all pointing the same direction. Diana leaned forward and looked at the documents without touching them. My attorney needs certified copies of the Cayman transfers to file the fraud complaint. The fraudulent assignment agreements on the 3 properties are already documented on our end. You'll have them Monday, the sheriff said. I need them today, she said. She looked at him without blinking. I didn't drive here to wait until Monday. The sheriff looked at me. I nodded. I can have digital certified copies to your attorney by 6 o'clock, he said. 5:30, she said. 5:30, he agreed. I looked at Caleb. The loan agreement. Original document, does it have a wet signature or digital? Wet signature, Caleb said. My father signed everything by hand. He didn't trust electronic. Good. I looked at the sheriff. That goes to the civil attorney tonight. We file the estate claim against the Cayman account Monday morning before the guardianship petition can be refiled. It can't be refiled, the sheriff said, not without the physician's assessment. Garrett's retraction kills the medical standing. Then we move before they find another doctor, I said. Diana straightened up. What happens tonight? I looked at my watch. 4:31. Tonight, I said, we finish this. He knocked twice before pushing the door open. 3 short raps, the way he'd knocked on my office door at the ranch every morning for 20 years when he had something that needed discussing. Harold Sims, 58 years old, reading glasses on a chain around his neck, a leather briefcase that was older than most of the people in this building. He looked at the 4 of us in the storage room, and then he looked at me, and I could see 20 years of working side by side moving behind his eyes, and behind that something heavier. Harold, I said. James. He set the briefcase on the table. He didn't sit down. I drove 3 hours to say something to your face instead of over the phone, so let me say it. He looked at me directly. I signed documents I shouldn't have signed. I did it because your son came to me in August with IRS records, 5 years of underreported mineral income, roughly $4.2 million in exposure, and he told me that if I didn't cooperate, he'd file a referral by end of week. The room was very quiet. He had the actual records, the sheriff asked. He had everything, Harold said. Transaction logs, royalty statements, the offshore routing from 2019 and 2020. He paused. James, I should have called you the day he walked into my office. I know that. I've known it every day since August. I looked at him. What did you sign? 2 affidavits confirming incidents of... He stopped, chose the word carefully, cognitive irregularity. 1 in September, 1 in October. Both submitted to the court as supporting documentation for the petition. He reached into the briefcase and put a USB drive on the table. I also kept every transaction record from the past 3 years. Every transfer. Every account movement. Every time money left the ranch operating fund and went somewhere it shouldn't have. He pushed the USB toward me. I kept it because I knew one day you'd need it. and because I couldn't live with only having done the wrong thing. Diana picked up the USB and looked at me. Is this everything? If Harold kept it, I said, it's everything. Harold looked at her, then back at me. Who is she? Someone your son also stole from, Diana said pleasantly. Harold closed his eyes briefly. How many of us are there? Enough, I said. I picked up the USB and handed it to the sheriff. Can you get this to the forensic accountant tonight? Already on speed dial, the sheriff said. I looked at Harold. He was still standing, hadn't sat down, hadn't taken off his jacket. The posture of a man who doesn't feel he's earned the right to get comfortable yet. Sit down, Harold, I said. He sat down. Thank you for driving, I said. And thank you for keeping the records. He nodded once, the tight nod of a man receiving something he knows he only partially deserves. What do you need me to do now? Stay close, I said. The next 2 hours are going to move fast. After Harold sat down, I waited until Diana and Caleb had stepped out to make their calls. Then I closed the door. Just me and the sheriff. He looked at the closed door, then at me. He knew. Men who have spent 30 years reading situations know when a door closing means something specific. I put the technical document on the table between us. The one Diana had handed me in the ballroom, the geological survey with my son's name on the cover page and numbers inside that had no business being anywhere outside of my private files. Look at these, I said. He looked. GPS coordinates, I said. 6 decimal places, 30.478219 north, 98.432107 west. I watched his face. Production rate for well 7. 340 barrels per day, seasonal variance of 4.2%. I had those numbers in a report I commissioned in February 2024. That report went to 3 people, me, the geologist in Midland, and you. The sheriff didn't move. The geologist in Midland has been in a care facility since March, I said. Early onset. He hasn't spoken a coherent sentence in 8 months. I paused. So that leaves 2 of us. He put both hands flat on the table. Not defensive, the gesture of a man steadying himself for something he's been carrying. July, he said. 14th through 16th. Tell me, I said. He exhaled slowly. Your son called me in June. Said he wanted to understand the ranch better. Understand what you'd built, what it meant to you. He said you two had been distant, and he was trying to close that gap. He stopped. He sounded like he meant it, James. He sounded like the boy I watched grow up. And you met him in Austin 3 times. Over those 3 days. He asked good questions, the kind of questions a son asks when he's genuinely trying to understand his father's work. He shook his head slowly. I told him about the wells, the production numbers, the GPS coordinates because he said he wanted to visit the sites and surprise you. A pause. I deleted those meetings from the report because I was ashamed. Not because I was covering for him, because I felt like a fool. I looked at my oldest friend across a folding table in a storage room that smelled like cleaning solution. Did you know what he was going to do with it? I asked. No, he said. I swear to you, James, no. I believed him. That was the worst part. I believed him completely. Which meant my son had looked this man in the eye and performed grief and filial love well enough to fool someone who had known him since he was 7 years old. Okay, I said. That's all you're going to say. What else is there to say right now? I looked at my watch. Can you still make the calls we need? Yes, he said. Absolutely yes. Then make them. He made 4 calls in 22 minutes. I sat on the milk crate and listened to all of them. The first was to Lone Star Capital Partners, their general counsel, a woman named Patricia, who apparently answered her phone on weekends and didn't waste time on pleasantries. Patricia, it's Roy Dalton. I need confirmation of the outstanding debt position on the Hartley family account. A pause. Yes, I'll hold. While he held, he looked at me. She's pulling it up. 8.7, I said. That's the number. He nodded. Into the phone, $8.7 million secured against the Hartley Development portfolio on 6th and the South Lamar parcel. Another pause. Yes. I need a formal demand letter issued tonight and hand-delivered to the Driscoll Hotel on Congress. Tonight, Patricia. I understand it's Sunday. He listened. Tell them it's James Calloway's account and he needs it done. They'll know what that means. He ended the call and looked at me. 30 minutes. Good, I said. Next. The second call was to the forensic accountant, a man named Briggs, who spoke in the clipped, efficient sentences of someone who bills by the hour and respects people who don't waste his time. USB drive coming your way tonight, the sheriff said. 3 years of ranch operating fund transactions. I need a full trace on every outbound transfer above $10,000 by Monday, 8 a.m. A pause. Cross-reference with a Cayman Islands account. I'll text you the details. Another pause. I know what day it is, Briggs. Double rate. You'll have the transfer in an hour. Third, call the civil attorney. Fourth, call a judge the sheriff had known for 15 years who owed him a favor he'd never called in. When it was done, he set the phone on the table and rolled his shoulders. The demand letter will be there by 7, he said. Briggs starts tonight. The attorney is filing the estate claim first thing Monday, and Judge Morrison will make sure the refiling of the guardianship petition gets flagged if it comes across any desk in Travis County. I looked at him. 19 minutes, he said. Not 20. I said 20. I said, I know what you said. For a moment, the room was quiet, the quiet of two men who have been friends long enough to sit in a storage room, surrounded by evidence of one of the worst days either of them has experienced, and still find something small to argue about. Because that's what you do when the alternative is feeling the full weight of everything at once. Roy, I said. He looked at me. Thank you, I said. For all of it. Including the part you got wrong. He was quiet for a moment. That's more than I deserve. Probably, I said. But it's what I've got. Before I reveal what my son placed on that table and what he said to me in that storage room, comment. Ready below if you're still here. Because this is the moment I'd been preparing for, and the moment I almost didn't survive. One thing before we continue: some details in this story have been shaped for storytelling purposes and may not reflect events exactly as they occurred. If that changes how you want to engage with this, the door is open, and there's no judgment in walking through it. I was alone in the storage room when the door opened. I knew it was him before I looked up, not because of the footsteps, but because of the way the air in the room changed. The particular quality of silence that follows a person who has decided to stop pretending. He closed the door behind him, looked at the documents spread across the table, looked at me. Where are the others? He asked. Gone, I said. He pulled up the second milk crate and sat down across from me, not standing over me, not positioning himself for dominance. Sitting. Eye level. The first time all day he had chosen that. You've been busy, he said. So have you, I said, for about 18 months by my count. He looked at the Cayman printout on the table without touching it. I want you to hear something from me before this goes any further. I'm listening. I'm not going to apologize tonight, he said. Not because I don't understand what I've done, but because an apology right now would be something I'm saying to protect myself, and we both know it. He met my eyes. I don't want to do that to you. I looked at my son. Then what do you want to do? He reached into his jacket and put an envelope on the table. IRS, he said. Voluntary disclosure, 5 years of underreported mineral income, estimated exposure 4.2 million plus penalties. He slid it toward me. If you walk out of this storage room and into that ballroom tonight, I send this to the Criminal Investigation Division at 8 o'clock. Your voluntary disclosure agreement with them expires at midnight. I had a contact pull the filing date. I didn't touch the envelope. You've been carrying that since August, I said. Since July, he said. I had it ready before I came to the ranch for those 3 days. The BBQ, the fence line, the Rangers game on the old set. He had driven to the ranch in July with that envelope already prepared. And if I go home, I said, sign the power of attorney. Let the petition proceed. What happens to the envelope? It disappears, he said. You live on the ranch. You're comfortable. Nobody bothers you. Comfortable, I said. He held my gaze. It's a good offer, Dad. I reached into my vest pocket and took out my phone. I turned the screen toward him. An email. IRS Criminal Investigation Division. Dated October 4th, 2025. Subject line Voluntary Disclosure Agreement accepted and closed. I filed it myself, I said. 3 months ago, 4.2 million plus a 30% penalty, paid in full. I set the phone on the table between us. I've been doing this for 40 years, son. I know how to read a formation before someone else finds it. He looked at the email for a long time without speaking. Then I took out my phone and sent one letter. He stared at the email on my phone screen for a long time. Not reading it, he'd read it in the first 5 seconds. Just looking at it the way you look at something when your mind is working through the implications, and your face is the only thing in the room you still have control over. October 4th, he said finally. October 4th, I said. 3 months ago. 3 months ago. He set the envelope down on the table. Didn't slide it back toward me. Just set it down the way you set something down when it has stopped being useful. How did you know I had it? He asked. I didn't, I said. I knew I had exposure. I knew that anyone who looked hard enough at the 2019 and 2020 royalty structure would find it. So I closed it myself before anyone could use it. I paused. That's how you operate in this industry, son. You don't wait for someone to find the problem. You find it first. He was quiet. I could see him rebuilding, not panicking, not collapsing, but the way a very good chess player looks at a board when a piece they'd relied on has been removed, recalculating from the current position. The Cayman account, he said. Documented, I said. 23 transfers, your name and Margaret's. The sheriff's forensic accountant has the USB as of 40 minutes ago. The petition. Garrett filed his retraction this morning. Without the physician's assessment, your emergency petition loses its strongest medical foundation. It may not be dead, but it is crippled. I can find another doctor. You can try, I said. Judge Morrison will flag any refiling that comes across his desk in Travis County. You'd need to find a doctor and a different jurisdiction, and you'd need to do it before the estate claim hits the court Monday morning. I looked at him steadily. You're a smart man. Run the math. He did. I could see it happening not in his expression, which stayed controlled, but in the quality of his stillness. The particular stillness of someone arriving at a conclusion they don't like. The ranch, he said quietly. Still mine, I said. The mineral rights. Still mine? Everything. Everything, I said. Exactly as it was when I drove into Austin this morning. He looked at the documents on the table. The Cayman printout. The loan agreement. The USB slot where Harold's drive had been. 4 months of careful architecture dismantled over the course of a Sunday. I underestimated you, he said. Yes, I said. You did. He stood up, straightened his jacket, looked at me with something in his face that wasn't quite defeat, and wasn't quite respect, somewhere between the two in the territory that only exists between people who know each other well enough to skip past pretense. What happens now? He asked. Now, I said, you go back to your wedding, and I go finish what I started. I put my phone back in my vest pocket and stood up. He was still standing there when I opened the door and walked out. I came out of the service corridor and into the ballroom at 6:28. The reception was at full momentum. The band had replaced the string quartet, the dance floor had people on it, and 200 guests were deep enough into the evening that the particular looseness of a well-catered open bar had set in. Nobody was watching the windows. I was. At 6:31, the first one turned onto Congress Avenue. Black. Cadillac Escalade. The Lone Star Capital Partners logo on the rear passenger door, silver tasteful the size of a business card. It pulled to the curb in front of the Driscoll's main entrance with the unhurried certainty of a vehicle that has never once had to circle for parking. The second came 10 seconds later. Same make, same color, same logo. Parked directly behind the first. The third followed the second like punctuation. 3 vehicles. 6 doors. All of them closed simultaneously the way things happen when people have been given specific instructions about timing. The man who stepped out of the lead vehicle was 58 years old, silver-haired, a dark suit that didn't need a logo to communicate what it cost. Marcus Webb, CEO of Lone Star Capital Partners. The man I had called at 2 in the afternoon and said simply, "I need you at the Driscoll at 6:30. 3 vehicles. Don't explain anything to anyone until you hear from me." He had said, "I'll be there." I had said, "Thank you, Marcus." He had said, "James, you've had money with us for 11 years, and you've never asked for anything. Whatever this is, I'll be there." Through the ballroom window, I watched him look at the entrance. He adjusted his cuffs, said something to the man beside him. Then he turned and walked through the Driscoll's front door. Behind me, the band was playing something from the 70s, a song I recognized but couldn't name. The dance floor moved. Glasses clinked. Someone laughed at something near the bar. I looked around the room at the senator, at the judge, at the 3 women who moved like a unit, at the mother of the bride who was currently explaining something to a group near the dessert table, with the authority of a woman who has never once questioned whether her explanations are welcome. I thought about a man in Fredericksburg who had knocked on my door twice before entering every morning for 20 years. I thought about a 22-year-old who had been carrying an envelope for 6 months because his father asked him to find a way to make it right. I thought about a woman in a gray dress who had driven here not because she was invited, but because she needed something confirmed, and who had stayed because she decided to see it through. I looked down at the borrowed vest, the clip-on tie, the boots with the worn-down heel. Then I walked toward the ballroom entrance to wait for Marcus Webb. Marcus Webb moved through the grand ballroom, the way water moves through a room, not fast, not slow, finding the path of least resistance, while simultaneously making everything around it aware of its presence. He walked past the senator without stopping. The senator turned to look. He walked past the judge, the same Judge Harrison who had my son's guardianship petition on his docket for the 15th. Harrison's eyes followed him with the careful attention of a man trying to determine whether he should know this person. He walked past the mother of the bride, who was mid-sentence about something involving the South Lamar parcel. She stopped, looked. The 3 women near her stopped with her the way a unit does when its center pauses. He walked past my son. My son saw him at 15 feet and recognized him at 10. I watched the calculation happen in real time. Marcus Webb, Lone Star, capital debt position, Arkan. On alt son, thieves outlined the fam's account. Why is he here? What does he know how bad? 4 seconds of very fast thinking behind a face that showed none of it. Marcus didn't stop for my son. He walked to the east wall of the grand ballroom, to the corner near the kitchen service door, where a man in a badly fitting vest was standing with an empty champagne tray. He stopped, looked at me for a moment, the vest, the boots, the clip-on tie. Something moved behind his eyes that wasn't quite a smile. Then he put his hand out. "James," he said. I shook it. "Marcus, thank you for coming." 3 vehicles, he said, as requested. He glanced around the room, 200 people now watching with the focused attention of people who have realized that something is happening that they don't have the context for yet. "You want to tell me what we're doing?" "In about 30 seconds, I said, "I'm going to say a few things to this room. After that, I'd like you to have a conversation with the Hartley family about their outstanding position." $8.7 million, he said. "Our demand letter arrived 12 minutes ago. Their attorney called immediately." "What did their attorney say?" "That they'd need time to arrange payment." "And what did you say?" "That they had until the end of the month," Marcus said. "Standard terms." He looked at me steadily. "Is that still the right answer?" That's exactly the right answer, I said. He nodded. He didn't ask anything else 11 years of banking relationship, and he understood instinctively that the man he knew didn't ask for 3 vehicles on a Sunday evening without a reason worth honoring. The band finished their song. In the small gap between songs, the room's ambient noise dropped by half. I set the champagne tray on the nearest table. I reached up and unclipped the tie. Marcus Webb took one step to the side, and slightly behind me the movement of a man positioning himself as a witness, not a participant, giving me the center of the room. I had it. I unbuttoned the vest and took it off. Nobody in the room said anything. The band had stopped between songs and hadn't started the next one yet, and in that gap, the sound of 200 people breathing was the loudest thing in the grand ballroom of the Driskill Hotel. I folded the vest and set it on the table next to the champagne tray. Underneath it, a blue flannel shirt, green and white plaid check soft from 30 years of washing. The shirt I had put on at 3 in the morning without thinking about it, the same shirt I wore every day on the ranch, the same shirt I was wearing in the Houston Chronicle photo that a 22-year-old had been carrying in his memory for 6 years. I didn't put on anything else. I didn't need to. I looked at the room, 200 people. Some of them had seen me all day, a face that registered as service staff, a function background. Some of them were meeting me now for the first time. All of them were looking at a 64-year-old man in a flannel shirt standing in the middle of their reception, and none of them knew yet what that meant. "My name is James Calloway," I said. My voice came out the way I wanted it to, not loud, not heated. The voice I used when I was explaining something important to someone who needed to hear it clearly. "I'm the father of the groom. I've been here since 6:43 this morning." I heard a sound move through the room. Not words, just the collective intake of something being understood. "I came here today wearing borrowed clothes because I wanted to see something for myself before I acted on it." I looked at my son, who was standing near the dance floor, completely still. "I've seen it." I looked at the mother of the bride. "Lone Star Capital Partners will be in contact with your family's attorney this week regarding the outstanding debt position of $8.7 million. Standard terms apply. End of month." She opened her mouth. Nothing came out. I looked at the father of the bride, who was standing near the bar with a Scotch glass he had forgotten to put down. "The amended prenuptial agreement your attorney prepared, the co-management clause, will not be executed. The original agreement stands." I looked at where Margaret Holloway had been sitting earlier. Her chair was empty. She had left some time in the past hour. The guardianship petition filed in Travis County, case number TX-2025-CV-4471, has been withdrawn by the attending physician and will not be refiled. I paused. "The ranch is mine. The mineral rights are mine. Everything I built over 40 years is exactly where it was when I woke up this morning." I picked up the folded vest from the table. I looked at my son one more time. He was looking back at me, not calculating, not performing, just looking. His new wife had her hand on his arm, and he didn't seem to know it. "I came here as your father," I said. "I'm leaving as your father. Everything else was business." I walked toward the exit. Behind me, the band didn't play. The hallway outside the grand ballroom was quieter than I expected. I had walked out, expecting the sound to follow me. The murmur of 200 people processing what they'd just witnessed, the particular frequency of a room that has had its center of gravity shifted. But the ballroom doors were thick, and out here it was just the carpet and the brass sconces and the sound of my own boots on the floor. Diana was waiting near the elevator. Caleb stood beside her. Harold was against the wall with his briefcase still in hand, like a man who hadn't yet decided whether to stay or go. "It's done," Diana asked. "The room knows," I said. "The rest is paperwork." She nodded slowly. "Then we should do this properly." We went back into the ballroom through the side entrance, the 4 of us single file, while the room was still suspended in the particular silence that follows something unexpected. People had begun to talk again, but quietly, the way people talk when they're not sure yet what the agreed-upon version of events is going to be. Diana walked to the nearest cocktail table, round white linen, 4 champagne flutes. Nobody had touched, and set 3 documents on it. The fraudulent assignment agreements for the 3 properties, each one marked with her attorney's certification, stamps in red ink. Clear, official, impossible to misread. Caleb set the loan agreement beside them. $340,000 dated March 2023 wet signature at the bottom. Then the Chapter 7 filing. Then a photograph, his father's company letterhead, the original contract for the 2 wells in Midland, the thing his father had built from 1 truck and 19 years of work. Harold opened his briefcase and placed a printed summary 40 pages, tabbed the forensic accounting overview he'd prepared over 3 sleepless nights in September when he realized what he'd signed. Every transfer, every routing number, every date. Then Dr. Raymond Garrett stepped forward from somewhere near the back of the room. He'd been there the whole time, I realized, waiting, and placed a single document on the table. 1 page. His formal retraction signed and notarized with his medical license number at the top, and the words withdrawn in full underlined twice. 4 people, 4 separate injuries. All of it on a cocktail table in the middle of a wedding reception. The room had gone quiet again. My son was still near the dance floor. His new wife had moved slightly away from him, not dramatically, not a statement, just the instinctive repositioning of someone who needs a moment to think. She was looking at the table. I looked at my son. He was looking at the 4 people who had just stood up in a room full of his carefully cultivated relationships and placed the evidence of what he'd done where everyone could see it. "Is there anything on that table that isn't accurate?" I asked him, quietly, just for him. He looked at me for a long moment. "No," he said. "The mother of the bride recovered first. That was the thing about her, she always recovered first. Because she had spent 57 years in rooms where losing your composure was the only unforgivable sin." She crossed the room toward me with her chin up and her hands clasped in front of her. The walk of a woman who has decided that offense is the only viable defense. "Mr. Calloway," she said, "I don't know what you think you've accomplished tonight, but I want you to understand whatever financial matters exist between our families, they are private matters. They will be handled privately, through the appropriate channels by the appropriate people." "They already are," I said. "Lone Star Capital's demand letter arrived 40 minutes ago. Your attorney has a copy. End-of-month standard terms." Her composure flickered just once, just for a second. $8.7 million is not a number that gets resolved in 30 days. "No," I said, "it isn't. That's why I'd suggest you call your attorney tonight rather than tomorrow morning." She looked at me, really looked at me for the first time all day. Not through me, not past me. At me. And I watched her arrive at something she hadn't considered this morning when she pointed at a fork placement and told a young man he didn't know the difference between ivory and champagne. She turned and walked back toward her husband. He was standing where I'd last seen him near the bar, Scotch glass finally set down. 3 feet away from him stood the state senator watching, the CEO of the hospital group watching, 2 real estate developers whose names I didn't know watching. He looked at his wife. Then he looked at the room, at the people he'd spent 40 years cultivating, the relationships he'd built on the understanding that his name meant something, that his judgment could be trusted, that he knew which things were real and which weren't. "Richard," the senator said carefully, "why don't we find somewhere quieter to talk?" He nodded. Once. The tight nod of a man who has just understood that every conversation he has for the next 6 months is going to begin with tonight. He walked toward the side exit without looking at my son, without looking at his daughter, without looking at me. His wife followed. The senator exchanged a glance with the CEO. The kind of glance that contains an entire conversation. I watched them go and felt nothing that resembled satisfaction. What I felt was closer to the particular exhaustion that comes after a long piece of work has been completed. Not happiness, not triumph. Just the quiet of a thing finally done. Dad, I turned. My son's new wife was standing 2 feet away. Her hands were clasped in front of her, the same posture as her mother, I noticed, and I wondered if she knew that. Do you have the name of a family attorney? She asked. Not one connected to my family, someone independent. I reached into my vest pocket and wrote a name and number on the back of a cocktail napkin. She took it without looking at it. Thank you, she said. She walked away. She didn't look back either. My son's wife found him near the east window, the one that looked out onto the alley I'd stood in that morning when I called the sheriff and said it's worse than I thought. She walked up to him without hurrying, stood close enough that their conversation wouldn't carry far enough that it was clear she had chosen her position deliberately. Tell me about the woman in the gray dress, she said. My son looked at Diana across the room where she was speaking quietly with her attorney on the phone. She's someone I know from Austin. Know how? A pause. The kind of pause that is itself an answer. How long? She asked. It wasn't what you're. How long? She said again. Not louder, just more precisely. He looked at the window. 14 months. She absorbed that this way you absorb something you already knew but needed to hear, confirmed, not with shock, but with the particular stillness of a door closing on a room you'd hoped to keep open. The properties, she said. The investment money, the $2 million. That's complicated. Don't, she said quietly. Please don't tell me it's complicated. I have a law degree. I understand complicated. What I'm asking you is whether it's true. He said nothing. That's also an answer, she said. She looked at him for a long moment. Her husband of 4 hours in his charcoal suit, at the window of the hotel, where they'd just promised each other things in front of 200 people. I watched her face move through something I couldn't fully read from across the room. Not rage, not grief exactly. More like the expression of someone who is reorganizing a structure they've built on a foundation that has just revealed itself to be different from what they believed. Did you love me? She asked. At all. Any part of it. He turned from the window and looked at her. Yes, he said. That part was real. She nodded slowly. Once. I'll need the name of a separate attorney for the prenuptial, she said. Not my family's. Someone who works for me. Your father already. Someone who works for me, she said again. Not my family. Me. He nodded. She straightened her dress, a small, precise motion. The kind of thing you do when you need to signal to yourself that you are still in control of at least one thing. Then she walked toward the exit, not toward her parents, not toward me, toward the elevator, toward the 4th-floor suite where her overnight bag was packed for a wedding night that was no longer going to happen the way she had imagined it. I watched her go. She was 29 years old, and she had just become, in the space of 4 hours, a person who would never make the same mistake twice. I wasn't sure if that was a good thing or not. I suspected it was simply a true thing. The room had thinned. The band had packed up. The cocktail table with the documents stood untouched in the center like something nobody wanted to be the first to walk past. My son was still by the east window. He didn't move when he saw me coming. Just stood with his hands in his jacket pockets and watched me cross the room the way you watch something arrive when you've decided to stop running from it. I stopped 3 feet away. How long have you known? He asked. Really? Since your mother died, I said. I watched you change. I told myself it was grief, then age. Then I ran out of things to tell myself and hired Roy to start looking. 18 months ago. Yes. He looked at the window. Why didn't you say anything? Because I needed to be wrong about this one, I said. You understand that. He was quiet. Then she asked me something. Mom. 6 months before she died. She said she was worried about what I was going to do with the anger. He paused. I told her I wasn't angry. She said she knew that was what worried her. I hadn't known that conversation happened. She was right to worry, he said. She usually was, I said. He turned and looked at me directly. You said you never taught me how to use what you built. That's not entirely true. You taught me everything. I just decided it wasn't enough. His jaw tightened. Not the money. The way you moved through the world. Quiet. Patient. I couldn't do it. I needed things faster. I know why, I said. You watched your mother die and decided time wasn't something you could afford to be patient about anymore. I made the same decision. I made it about the land. You made it about money. I looked at him. Neither of us was wrong about the urgency. We were wrong about the direction. He said nothing for a long moment. Dad. He said it the way he used to when he was young and had something he didn't know how to start. I'm not going to apologize tonight. Not because I don't understand what I did, but because anything I say right now would be to protect myself. And I don't want to do that to you. I looked at my son. 33 years old, charcoal suit, his mother's eyes. I'm not asking you to, I said. Then what are you asking? I thought about the ranch, the land, the 3 days in July, what they were, what they also somehow still remained. Nothing tonight, I said. Tonight I'm just standing here. He nodded once. We stood at the east window and looked at the city outside, two men who had run out of positions to hold and hadn't yet figured out what came next. That felt for the moment like enough. I walked out through the front entrance this time, not the service door, not the alley. The main entrance on Congress Avenue through the lobby, with its marble floors and brass fixtures and the portrait of Colonel Driscoll above the fireplace, a man who had built something and put his name on it, and whose name was still on it 130 years later. Because some things outlast the arguments about whether they deserve to. Caleb was waiting on the sidewalk. He had his jacket off, folded over his arm, his staff vest still on because he'd forgotten to take it off, or hadn't thought to. He looked like what he was, a 22-year-old who had been carrying something heavy for 6 months and had just set it down and wasn't entirely sure what to do with his hands now that they were empty. It's done, he asked. The legal part, I said. The rest takes longer. He nodded. He looked at the street Congress Avenue at 7 in the evening, the city moving the way it always moves, without reference to what has just happened in any particular building. My father would have, he started. Stopped. Go ahead, I said. He would have been angry that it took this long, he said. He was impatient. It drove my mother crazy. He looked at his shoes. But he also would have been here. If he could have been. He'd have wanted to see it. I know, I said. I wish he could have. We stood on the sidewalk for a moment in the January air. What happens to the claim, he asked. The 340 against your son's assets. It goes through the civil process, I said. It'll take time, but the documentation is clean and the liability is clear. I looked at him. It won't bring your father back. I want you to hear me say that directly, because I don't want you to spend the next 2 years waiting for a number to make things right that a number can't make right. He was quiet for a moment. I know, he said. I think I've known that for a while. Good, I said. He looked at me. The email you sent, Monday 7 a.m. Do you actually want me there? I sent it because I meant it, I said. I don't send things I don't mean. Something shifted in his face, not quite a smile, but the particular expression of someone who has been told something they needed to hear and are deciding whether to let themselves believe it. I'll be there, he said. I know you will, I said. I shook his hand, the firm, brief handshake of two people who have just agreed on something that matters. Then I walked to where I'd parked the truck 3 blocks east on 6th Street, and I sat in the cab for a few minutes before I started the engine. The city was lit up around me. Inside the Driscoll, 200 people were processing an evening they hadn't expected. Somewhere on the 4th floor, a woman in a wedding dress was sitting alone in a suite. I started the truck and drove home. The drive back took 3 hours and 20 minutes. I know, because I watched the clock again, the same way I had watched it coming in, except that this time I didn't run the heat low. I let the cab get cold, and then warm again, as the engine settled, and I drove through the hill country dark, with the radio off, and thought about nothing in particular, which is different from thinking about everything at once, even though it can feel the same. The days after a thing like that move strangely. On January 5th, a reporter from the Austin American-Statesman called my ranch line, asking for comment on a story about the Hartley family's debt restructuring. I said I had no comment and hung up. On January 6th, Diana Whitfield's attorney filed the civil fraud complaint with Travis County District Court. 3 properties, $2 million in investment losses. The filing was 47 pages and had 17 exhibits. Diana sent me a text that said simply, "Filed. Thank you." I replied, "Good luck." On January 7th, Harold called to tell me that the IRS had accepted his amended returns, 5 years of corrected filings. His own exposure significantly reduced by his cooperation with the investigation. His voice on the phone was the voice of a man who has been carrying something for 4 months and has just been told he can put it down. "I know I don't deserve it," he said. "The reduced exposure." I said, "You kept the USB. That's worth something." He was quiet for a moment. "Thank you, James." I said, "Come back to work Monday." He said, "You still want me?" I said, "I never didn't want you, Harold. You made a bad decision under pressure. I've made worse." On January 8th, my son's wife filed for divorce. Her attorney, the independent one I'd written on the cocktail napkin, issued a statement saying she was seeking an annulment on the grounds of fraudulent misrepresentation. The prenuptial agreement, she'd signed the original one, not the amended version, protected her from the liabilities her husband was now accumulating. On January 9th, my son called me. I didn't answer. I wasn't ready. That wasn't the same as never. On January 10th, Caleb drove out to the ranch and spent the morning walking the east pasture with me, looking at the ground, the way young geologists look at ground, like it's a text they're learning to read. He asked good questions, quiet questions, the kind that come from someone who has been thinking about something for a long time before they say it out loud. "My father would have liked this land," he said at one point. "I think so too," I said. We walked back to the house in time for lunch. January 14th was a Thursday. I know that because I checked 3 times the way you check things when the date carries a weight that doesn't match what's actually going to happen in it. The guardianship hearing TX-2025-CV-4471. Judge Harrison's docket had been scheduled for 9 in the morning on the 15th. With Garrett's retraction filed and the petition formally withdrawn, there was nothing to appear for. The 15th was going to be an ordinary Friday, but the 14th still felt like something. I sat on the porch after dinner with a cup of coffee that went cold while I was thinking. The hill country dark is a specific kind of dark, not the dark of a city where the sky stays orange from the light below, but real dark, the kind where the stars are actually visible because nothing is competing with them. I thought about the petition, about what the 15th would have looked like if I hadn't driven to Austin 2 weeks ago in a borrowed vest. A courtroom, Judge Harrison, Margaret Holloway presenting a case built on a physician's assessment that no longer existed, and a timeline constructed from 23 wire transfers and 3 days in July when my son came home for what I thought was the best weekend in 2 years. I thought about my wife, about the conversation she'd had with our son that I hadn't known about until 2 weeks ago, the one about anger, about what worried her. I thought about all the conversations I hadn't been in the room for, and all the ones I had been in the room for and hadn't understood. I picked up my phone. My son's message from January 9th was still there. 4 words: I need to talk. I looked at it for a long time. I thought about Caleb walking the east pasture, asking quiet questions. I thought about Harold's voice on the phone when he said, You still want me. I thought about Diana's text filed thank you and the particular economy of a woman who doesn't waste words. I thought about a 64-year-old man driving into Austin at 3 in the morning in a borrowed vest because he needed to see something for himself before he could believe it. I thought about what it costs to build something over 40 years, and what it costs to almost lose it in a day, and what it costs to sit on your own porch on a January night and know that both things happened and that you're still here. I didn't reply to the message, but I didn't delete it either. I turned off the porch light and went inside. Tomorrow was going to be an ordinary Friday. I intended to treat it like one. I was on the porch at 8:53 when my phone showed the time. 9 o'clock was 6 minutes away. In a courtroom on 11th Street in Austin, Judge Harrison would have been calling the docket. A bailiff would have been arranging chairs. Margaret Holloway would have been opening her briefcase on the plaintiff's table, pulling out the petition she had spent 4 months constructing from physician assessments and wire transfer records and the particular expertise of a woman who had known me for 22 years and used every bit of that knowledge against me. None of that was happening. Harold came out through the screen door with a second cup of coffee and set it on the rail beside me without asking. He'd driven back to the ranch 2 days ago, not to his desk, not yet, just to the property, the way a man returns to a place he's been away from long enough that he needs to remind himself it's still there. We stood on the porch and watched 9 o'clock arrive and pass. "How does it feel?" he asked after a while. "Quiet," I said. He nodded like that was the right answer. The forensic accountant sent his preliminary report this morning. 41 pages. Every transfer documented, every routing number traced. He wrapped both hands around his cup. "It's clean, James. Everything we need." "Good," I said. "The civil attorney thinks the estate claim will move fast. Strong documentation, clear liability, no jurisdictional complications." He paused. "She said 6 months, maybe less." "6 months is fine," I said. He looked at me. "You're not in a hurry." "I was never in a hurry," I said. That was always the difference. The hill country morning was doing what it does in January, cold enough to see your breath, bright enough that the frost on the grass caught the light and held it for an hour before letting go. 240 acres of it stretching out from the porch rail to the tree line on the east ridge, the same view I had looked at every morning for 30 years. Below the surface of all of it, quiet, patient, going nowhere, the oil that had been there long before I arrived and would be there long after. "Harold," I said. "Yeah. Come back to work Monday," I said. "Properly. Your desk, your files, your coffee mug in the third cabinet from the left." He was quiet for a moment. "You sure?" "You kept the USB," I said, "when it would have been easier not to. That tells me what I need to know about you." He looked out at the field. "I should have called you in August." "Yes," I said. "You should have, and you didn't, and you're here now." I picked up my coffee. "Monday." "Monday," he said, 9:17. The courtroom on 11th Street was moving on to its next case. I drank my coffee and watched the frost melt. He didn't call first. That was how I knew it was a visit and not a report Roy Dalton had been calling before showing up for 30 years. Ever since his dispatcher days when dropping in unannounced at a rancher's property could get you met at the gate by a man who took his posted signs seriously. The fact that he pulled up the drive at 2 in the afternoon on a Saturday without so much as a text meant he had something he needed to say in person and wasn't sure how to start. I was in the garage checking the F-150's rear brake line when I heard the cruiser, his old personal vehicle, not the department issue he'd driven for years, a dark green Silverado with a dent in the passenger door from a parking lot in Fredericksburg he'd never had fixed. I came out, and we stood in the driveway without either of us moving toward the other. "Roy," I said. "James," he said. We went into the garage and sat on the 2 wooden chairs I keep near the workbench for exactly this kind of conversation, the kind that needs to happen sitting down but not inside. "IRS filed their criminal referral on the Cayman account this morning," he said. Your son's attorney has been notified. He'll need to retain separate counsel. His current attorney has a conflict given her own involvement in the account. Margaret, I said. She resigned from the Bar Association voluntarily yesterday morning, before they could open a formal inquiry. He paused. Her attorney says she's cooperating fully with the investigation. She always was thorough, I said. He looked at his hands. James, what I did in July, giving him those numbers. I've been thinking about it every day since you showed me that document in the storage room. I know you have, I said. I don't know how to... He stopped. Started again. 30 years. I've known you 30 years, and I handed your son the tools he needed to take everything you built. Because he sat across from me and said he wanted to understand his father better, and I believed him. He shook his head. I should have known. You couldn't have known, I said. He's very good at it. He learned from someone who was very good at reading people. I looked at him. That was me, Roy. He learned it from me. The sheriff was quiet for a moment. You're not angry, he said. It wasn't quite a question. I'm past angry, I said. Angry takes energy I'd rather spend on something else. He nodded slowly. The criminal referral. It's going to get complicated for him. I know. Are you going to... He stopped. I'm not going to interfere with the process, I said. Whatever happens, happens through the proper channels. I paused. He's still my son, Roy. That doesn't change what he did. It also doesn't stop being true. The sheriff looked at me for a long moment. Then he reached into his jacket and put a folded piece of paper on the workbench. Briggs finished the full trace, he said. Every dollar accounted for. He stood up. Coffee smells good. Inside, I said. I'll put a fresh pot on. The call came at 8:47 in the evening, while I was at the kitchen table going through the Briggs report with a yellow highlighter and a cup of coffee that had been sitting long enough to be technically lukewarm, but I was drinking anyway. I looked at the screen before I answered. Diana Whitfield. First time she'd called rather than texted. Diana, I said. James. A pause, not awkward, just the pause of someone organizing what they want to say. The judge signed the preliminary injunction this afternoon. The 3 properties are frozen pending the fraud ruling. Nothing moves without court approval. That's good news, I said. It's a start, she said. My attorney thinks we'll have a full ruling within 4 months. Maybe 3 if the documentary evidence is as clean as it looks. Another pause. Your sheriff's forensic accountant does good work. Roy finds good people, I said. A brief silence. Then, are you all right? The question surprised me slightly, not that she asked it, but the directness of it. Diana Whitfield was not a woman who asked questions she didn't want answered. I'm reading a 41-page financial report on a Saturday night, I said, so relatively. She made a sound that was almost a laugh. I've been doing the same thing. Different report, same Saturday night. How are you? I asked. She was quiet for a moment. The kind of quiet that means someone is deciding how honest to be. I built those restaurants myself, she said. Every one of them. 12 years, one location at a time. And I let someone walk me through a door I should have seen for what it was. A pause. That's the part I keep coming back to. Not the money. The door. I know that feeling, I said. I imagine you do. She paused. He was very convincing. Yes, I said, he was. Is that something you're proud of? She asked. In a complicated way. I thought about it honestly. In a very complicated way, I said. Yes. She was quiet again. Then thank you, James, for confirming the documents, for what you did in that ballroom. You didn't have to include me in any of it. You were already in it, I said. I just made it official. Still, she said. Still, I agreed. We sat on the line for a moment, without speaking. 2 people who hadn't known each other 2 weeks ago, connected now by the particular bond of people who have been through something difficult together and come out the other side still standing. Get some sleep, she said finally. The report will still be wrong tomorrow morning. It'll be documented wrongdoing, I said. That's different. She laughed, a real one this time. Good night, James. Good night, Diana. I set the phone down and looked at page 14 of the Briggs report. Then I picked up the yellow highlighter and kept going. He called on a Sunday morning, January 16th at 12 a.m. I was outside checking the irrigation line on the south pasture, the one that had been losing pressure since November, and that I'd been meaning to look at since before any of this started, back when my biggest problem was a slow leak in a half-inch pipe and not my son. I almost didn't answer. Not out of anger, I'd moved past the kind of anger that makes you not answer the phone. More out of the knowledge that I didn't yet have the right words, and I've never been a man who speaks before he has the right words. But I answered, "Dad." His voice was different from the one I'd heard in room 214 on Sunday morning. Quieter, less certain of its own construction. "I'm here," I said, a long pause. "I don't know how to do this." "Neither do I said. "So just talk." Another pause. "My attorney called yesterday about the criminal referral." "I know," I said. "Are you—" He stopped. "Did you file it?" "No," I said. "That was the IRS. I filed the voluntary disclosure on myself 3 months ago. The referral on the Cayman account came from the forensic investigation. That's a separate process, and I don't control it." Silence. "I'm not going to interfere with it," I said. "I want you to hear me say that clearly. Whatever happens goes through the proper channels. That's all I can give you." "I understand," he said. His voice was steady. "I'm not calling to ask you to fix it." A pause. "I know I don't have the right to ask you for anything right now." "You have the right to call me," I said. "You're my son. That part doesn't have conditions." The line was quiet for a long moment. "Can I come to the ranch?" he asked. "Not now. Not this week. When things settle down a little. When—" He stopped. "I want to sit in the kitchen. I want to drink bad coffee and not talk about any of this for a couple of hours." His voice tightened slightly. "I need something to feel like it used to. Even if it can't. Even if it's just for a morning." I looked out across the south pasture. The irrigation line. The November problem I'd been meaning to fix. "Yeah," I said. "Come when you're ready." "You sure?" I said it. I said, "I don't say things I don't mean." He was quiet for another moment. "Okay," he said. "Okay. Fix your situation first," I said. "Get proper legal counsel. Handle what needs handling. Then come." "I will," he said. I ended the call and stood in the pasture for a moment. Then I crouched down and found the leak in the irrigation line, a hairline crack in the coupling exactly where I'd expected it to be. Small problems. Fixable problems. I reached for my wrench. The email arrived at 6:43 on the morning of January 17th, the same time I noticed that I had walked through the Driscoll's service entrance 2 weeks before. I was at the kitchen table with my first cup of coffee, reading the overnight news on my laptop, when the notification came in. I almost scrolled past it. The sender name showed as C. Reyes, and it took me a half-second to place it, because I'd only ever spoken to him in person and hadn't seen his name written down outside of a loan agreement that belonged to his father. I opened it. No greeting. Just content, which told me something about how he'd been raised. Attached, CV undergraduate transcript, UT Austin Petroleum, Geology Program, GP, A3.8. Also attached a summary of my senior thesis subsurface mapping methodology for mature hill country formations. My advisor says it's the best work he's seen from an undergraduate in 11 years. I'm not telling you that to impress you. I'm telling you because you should know what you'd be getting. I stopped and read that paragraph twice. My father told me about you when I was 16. He said you were the kind of man who built things that lasted because you understood that the ground doesn't lie. It just waits for someone patient enough to read it correctly. He said if I ever got the chance to learn from someone like that, I should take it without overthinking. I've been overthinking it for 2 weeks. I'm done overthinking it. You said Monday 7 a.m. I'll be there, if that's still the offer. I set my coffee cup down. I read the thesis summary. It was 40 pages, and I read all 40 of them before the sun had fully cleared the East Ridge. His advisor wasn't wrong. The subsurface mapping work showed an instinct for reading formation data that most geologists developed over decades, not in a senior thesis. His father had been right about one thing, the boy had the eye for it. I thought about the East Pasture, the formation I'd been meaning to map properly since 2022, the one I'd put off, because the initial readings were complex enough that I'd wanted a second set of eyes on it, and the geologist in Midland had been the only person I trusted with that kind of work. I typed 4 words, offer still stands. Monday. I sent it and closed the laptop. Outside the hill country. Morning was moving into its second hour, the frost gone, the light going gold across the grass. The particular stillness of a January morning on a piece of land that has been worked and rested and worked again for 30 years and intends to keep going. Below it all, quiet as it's always been, the oil waited. It had been waiting since before I arrived. It would wait after I was gone. The question was always who would be there to read it right. He arrived on a Sunday morning earlier than I expected. A rental Camry Silver Anonymous, not the least BMW he'd driven 2 years ago. He pulled up the drive slowly, gravel quiet under the tires, and stopped at the gate. I was already outside. He got out in jeans and a dark blue flannel shirt. I didn't know if that was intentional. I decided it didn't matter. We stood 10 feet apart in the January morning and looked at each other. You came early, I said. I know, he said. Is that okay? You're here, I said. That's okay. He looked past me at the ranch, the house, the garage, the East Pasture in the morning light. The place he grew up. His mother's garden along the south wall was still there, still coming back every spring, without anyone tending it because she had chosen plants that knew how to take care of themselves. It looks the same, he said. It is the same, I said. That was the point. We went inside. I put coffee on without asking. He'd been drinking it black since he was 19, and some things don't change. We sat on opposite sides of the kitchen table. I retained a criminal defense attorney Friday, he said. Independent, not connected to Margaret or the Hartleys. Good, I said. He says cooperating fully is the right move. A pause. I intend to. Good, I said again. The coffee maker worked through its cycle. A mockingbird argued with itself in the live oak by the fence. The kitchen was warm. Dad, he said. Yeah, I don't know how to fix this. I poured 2 cups and set one in front of him. Neither do I said. So drink your coffee. He wrapped both hands around the cup the way he used to when he was small, and the mornings were cold, and his mother hadn't turned the heat on yet. We sat in the kitchen for almost 2 hours and didn't talk about any of it. It was the closest thing to right that the morning had to offer. We both knew it. Neither of us said so. 7 o'clock Monday morning. I was already outside, had been since 6:15, walking the fence line on the East Pasture, the way I do when I need to think, and don't want to do it, sitting down. The air was cold and still. The sky, the particular shade of dark blue that comes just before the sun clears the ridge, and the frost on the grass held the last of the night in it. I heard the car before I saw it. A truck older worked, in the kind of vehicle that belongs on a ranch road without apologizing for it. It came up the drive and stopped at the gate, and Caleb got out in the same way he'd gotten out of things all his life, I imagined, directly without preamble, already looking at what needed looking at. He was wearing a flannel shirt and boots. He had a rolled geological survey map under one arm and a thermos in his other hand, and a backpack that looked like it had been through 3 field seasons already. I opened the gate. You're early, I said. 6:58, he said. That's not early. That's on time. On time in this industry means 5 minutes early, I said. He looked at me. Then I'm 3 minutes late. I'll do better. I almost smiled. Come on, I said. We started across the East Pasture. The ground was hard under the frost, the way hill country caliche gets in January, compact, unyielding, the kind of surface that tells you nothing until you know how to ask it the right questions. Caleb walked beside me and said nothing for the first 100 yards, which was the right call. A man who talks before he's seen the land doesn't understand the land yet. Then from behind us, I heard a second set of footsteps on the frost. I turned. My son was coming across the pasture from the direction of the house, jacket on, coffee cup in hand. Boots he'd found somewhere in the back of the hall closet, where he'd left them 3 years ago. He hadn't called out, hadn't asked permission, just gotten up from the kitchen table and followed. Caleb stopped walking, looked at him, then looked at me. My son stopped 6 feet away. He looked at Caleb, the man whose father he had destroyed, standing on his father's land at 7 in the morning, holding a geological survey. "I owe you more than I can pay," my son said. "I know that. I'm not going to insult you by pretending otherwise." Caleb looked at him for a long moment. "No," he said. "You can't pay it back." A pause. "But you can stand here and watch how it's supposed to be done, if your father will allow it." They both looked at me. I looked at the two of them, the son I raised and the son I hadn't. Both of them standing in the frost on a Monday morning, at the beginning of something I couldn't fully see yet. I turned and kept walking east. Behind me, 2 sets of footsteps followed. The sun cleared the east ridge at 7:23. The 3 of us had stopped walking, without agreement, the way people stop when something worth stopping for happens in front of them. Caleb held his survey map flat against the wind. My son stood slightly behind coffee cup at his side, breath visible in the cold air. Neither spoke. I looked out across 400 acres. 40 years ago, I had stood on a lease in West Texas that the larger companies had walked away from, and I had read the formation data the way my first mentor taught me, slowly, without assumption, letting the ground speak instead of telling it what I wanted to find. This ground had been speaking to me for 30 years. Below where we stood, below the frost and the caliche and the limestone shelf at 400 feet, the formation ran east-southeast for 9 miles, holding what it had always held: patient, indifferent, waiting for whoever was paying attention. "The northeast quadrant," Caleb said, looking at his map. "That's where the formation is most accessible. If the methodology from my thesis holds." "It holds," I said. "I read all 40 pages. It holds." He looked back at the ground. "Then we start there." "Tuesday," I said. My son looked at Caleb, then at me. "Is there anything I can do?" The wind moved across the pasture. The light settled into the grass. "Learn to read the ground," I said. "That's where everything starts." He looked down at this frost-covered caliche under his boots. The same ground his grandfather bought in 1971. The same ground his mother walked holding his hand when the terrain got uneven. The same ground I had spent 40 years listening to. "Okay," he said quietly. "Show me." I looked at the two of them in the morning light. The son I raised and the one I hadn't. Both of them standing on land that was still mine and would need someone after me who knew how to listen. The oil below didn't choose who found it. It only waited for whoever was patient enough to look. I turned east and started walking. I didn't check if they were following. I already knew. I am 64 years old. I built something real. And I almost lost it, not to a stranger but to my own son, and partly to myself. There are things I did right. I read the ground. I prepared. I showed up when it mattered. But there are also things I got wrong long before that Sunday. In January conversations, I walked past doors I didn't open, a boy sitting on a hospital floor that I chose to leave alone when what he needed was for me to sit down beside him. Don't be me. Don't wait until the evidence is on a table, in a ballroom, before you walk into the room where someone you love is falling apart. I believe a man's character is built in the small moments, not in the grand ones. The grand ones only reveal what was already there. And I believe, as I have believed my whole life, that God gives us enough time to do the things that matter. The question is always whether we choose to use it. The oil doesn't choose who finds it. It waits for whoever is patient enough and humble enough to listen. If this story made you feel something, I'd ask you to leave it in the comments. Not for me, but because someone else might need to read what you have to say. And if you know someone who needs to hear this, share it with them. That's how stories do their work. Subscribe if you want to stay. What comes next will challenge you in ways you won't expect. And if that's not something you're ready for, there's no shame in stepping away and finding what fits you better. Thank you for staying until the end. That means more than you know.